People who have been traumatised by a bushfire, and I've seen this, I've lived through bushfires in the Adelaide Hills. In fact, our property was devastated by a bushfire in 1955, and it took us about 20 years to turn the business back into a profit-making enterprise. So we have a long road ahead of us, and many people are not going to recover, and the rebuilding effort is going to be significant. I think the announcement of this National Relief Agency is very welcome. It has to be a national effort. And I think people are feeling a range of emotions, and they're angry, they're frustrated, they're fearful, and they're also fearing what lies ahead. We're only in the first week of January. And so all of our leaders need to show the compassion and care to address the needs that people have, and people need to be reassured that their leaders are listening and that every arm of government is cooperating and working together to ensure that they can contain what lies ahead and help those that need to rebuild.
But isn't that what we haven't seen? We haven't seen that coordination between state and federal level. You know, we've heard Conservative commentators on Twitter saying that you've got Scott Morrison's team actively briefing journalists against the state counterparts. I mean, we've actually been able to sit back and watch Labor not have to do anything here. They've been tearing each other apart.
And the focus has to be on the people who are impacted by these fires. Whole communities are suffering. Small towns have been devastated. I've been particularly struck by what's happened on Kangaroo Island. I don't know if you know Kangaroo Island well. It's the most beautiful place. But the two people who died on Kangaroo Island were well known to my family, an experienced bushman and his son who was a surgeon. The community is just grieving, and this is happening across the country. So, of course, we need leadership at every level, and it is a national crisis demanding a national response.
There have been a lot of commissions, there's been a lot of investigations, but I think in this case there probably is, I think definitely a need for a Royal Commission into how this got so bad and how we can prevent some of this stuff from happening again. Do you agree?
There has to be a public inquiry in the aftermath of this massive bushfire, and of course there have been many public inquiries in the last 50 years or more. But this time, because it's had such a national impact, I think a nationally initiated Royal Commission is important, but it has to have a purpose. And I guess there are three reasons behind having a Royal Commission into bushfires. First, you have to look at the current system. Are there flaws in the system that must be addressed so we can make it more effective, more resilient? Secondly, are there new directions in fire management, risk management, new philosophies, new technologies that we should adopt? And third, who's responsible? Can we lay responsibility for the massive personal and business and public loss and damage that we've seen?
Ticks all those boxes.
Well, it does. But as you might recall from the last Royal Commission into the 2009 Victorian bushfires, it took about 18 months. Hundreds of witnesses were called. There were probably 60 or 70 recommendations at the end of it. And we have to ask ourselves, did that Royal Commission have the right impact?
Well, it didn't, because one of the recommendations was a certain amount of clearing of the land, hazard reduction each year. And we look at the figures of what happened in 2019 in Victoria. I think it's something like a sixth of what they recommended was actually backburnt.
Yeah,
so what's the point of a Royal Commission if nothing comes of it?
We've spoken about this a lot, Ali and I, about the fact that with local greens, there's been a huge backlog of backburning that hasn't been done, of land clearing that hasn't been done, and you can't get into these national parks. Things haven't been cleared there, so there's a huge issue there. A massive issue that's bigger than anything Scott Morrison's done wrong. How do you address that moving forward?
Well, you're absolutely right. There are lessons to be learned from previous bushfires, and we see it hasn't been addressed, and that's why we're seeing the level of devastation across Australia. So there are so many lessons to be learned, and if there is to be a Royal Commission into this bushfire, there will most definitely be a public inquiry of some description. But if there is a Royal Commission style inquiry, we must heed the recommendations, and that will include land management issues, backburning, reducing fire hazards.
This is a really big